Imagine a place where dreams aren't born easily, where each day is more about survival than building a future. Narrow streets, simple houses, noise, chaos, very little certainty. And now imagine that from a place like that rises a man who sets a record in the toughest organization in the world. No one in the history of the UFC has more submissions than Charles Oliveira. No one has forced more opponents to tap out. And very few have had to walk such a long and painful road to reach the top. This is not the story of a perfect champion who won everything. From the beginning, this is the story of a boy from a Brazilian favela whom doctors once said might not even be able to compete in sports at all. And who still became one of the most dangerous fighters the cage has ever seen. Charles do Bronx Oliveira, the greatest finisher in UFC history. But before the belts, the records, and the global fame, there was Garuya, a city in the state of São Paulo. Tourists know the beaches. Locals know the reality. And it was in the tougher part of that city that Charles grew up. His family had no money. There were no luxury conditions, no private coaching teams, no advantages. Just a small house, a modest environment, and parents who tried to give their children a chance at a better life. As a child, Oliveira also faced health problems. Doctors diagnosed him with a heart murmur and complications related to rheumatic fever. Some prognoses were cautious to pessimistic. High-level sports? A risk. Extreme physical strain? Not recommended. For most families, that would have been a clear sign to keep the child away from anything demanding. But his mother saw something different. She saw energy. She saw stubbornness. She saw desire. So instead of locking him away in safety, they allowed him to try sports. Not because they expected him to become a champion, but because he needed direction. In an environment where it's easy to slip into bad decisions, sport is often the only alternative. And that's when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu entered his life. He was around 12 years old when he first walked into a small gym. No luxury, no modern equipment. Old mats, a few coaches, and a group of boys looking for the same thing, a chance. Charles didn't have a branded GI. Sometimes he had to borrow one. He didn't have the advantage of physical strength. He wasn't the biggest or the most athletic. But he had something that can't be taught: instinct. From the very first training sessions, it was clear he thought differently on the ground. He quickly understood leverage, transitions, weight distribution. He wasn't reckless. He was patient. He waited for mistakes. And the moment they came, he punished them instantly. His coaches began to notice that this skinny kid had a natural killer instinct on the mat. Not in the sense of aggression, but in cold efficiency. When he locked in a choke, he didn't let go. When he caught a submission, he finished it. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gave him more than technique. It gave him structure, discipline, an escape from the reality of the streets. And most importantly, belief that his body, the one doctor said might be limited, could become his greatest weapon. He started winning local tournaments, collecting medals, gaining respect. Every training session was a step away from poverty. Every victory was proof that a prognosis doesn't define your future. At that time, no one was talking about the UFC. No one was talking about a submission record. He was just a kid from Garuya who had found direction. But right there, on old mats in a small gym, a style was beginning to form. One that would one day terrify the entire lightweight division. A style that doesn't wait for the judges. A style that ends fights before the final bell. And a story that was only just beginning. The Jiu-Jitsu medals were only the start. But in Brazil, there's another path. Tougher, more dangerous, and much faster if you want to change your family's life. Mixed martial arts. Charles Oliveira was still very young when he first stepped into a professional MMA cage. He didn't have a big team behind him or media support. He had only himself, his grappling skills, and hunger. Hunger for victory. Hunger for a better life. His early fights in Brazil followed a clear pattern. The moment the fight hit the ground, opponents panicked. Oliveira was fast, flexible, creative. He didn't just wait for a classic armbar or triangle. He flowed between positions as if he were playing chess several moves ahead. The results came immediately. Wins, finishes, submissions. An unbeaten streak began to grow, along with the reputation of a young specialist who could end a fight from anywhere. In regional organizations, he quickly became a name people talked about. And in the MMA world, that means only one thing: the big promotions start paying attention. He was just over 20 years old when the offer came that would change everything: the UFC. For most fighters, entering the UFC is the peak of a career. For Oliveira, it was the beginning of a real war. Suddenly, he wasn't facing local opponents. He was facing the world's elite, men who were stronger, more experienced, and used to the bright lights. He entered the UFC as a young phenomenon. Long arms, a dangerous guard, constant submission threat. And very quickly, he showed he hadn't come just to gain experience. Submissions, performance bonuses, finishes that thrilled fans. His style was risky but exciting. He wasn't afraid to go to the ground, not afraid to risk position if he sensed a chance to finish. And that's what drew attention. People began talking about him as one of the greatest grappling talents of the new generation. And with that came the nickname, Du Bronx, a reminder of his roots, his streets, his identity. He never forgot where he came from, and he wanted the world to know it. But the UFC is a different level. Talent alone isn't enough. The pressure is greater, the punches harder, mistakes are punished instantly. And that's where the first real test came. Losses began to appear. Some came after heavy strikes, others after exhaustion. Injuries slowed his progress. The momentum he had built would suddenly stall. And fans are quick to judge. Criticism surfaced that when under pressure, he mentally faded. That when he absorbed hard shots, his body and mind reacted differently than those of true champions. In the MMA world, labels like that spread fast, and they're hard to shake. Suddenly, he wasn't just a young phenomenon. He was a talent with a question mark. Was he mentally strong enough? Could he survive a real war? Or would he remain just a specialist who never breaks into the absolute elite? Oliveira was still young, but the UFC doesn't wait. Every fight decides the future. And his career began swinging between two extremes, thrilling. Wins and painful setbacks dot. It looked like he was at a crossroads. Either he would become another story of unfulfilled potential, or he would walk through the fire of doubt and come back stronger dot. And that phase would decide how the world would one day remember him. The doubts didn't pile up only among fans. They piled up inside the cage. Charles Oliveira had brilliant moments behind him, but his career started to resemble a roller coaster. A win that launched him upward, followed by a loss that dragged him back down. He couldn't find stability. He couldn't build a long winning streak. And in the lightweight division, where competition is brutal, consistency is everything. He reached a stage familiar to many talented fighters, good enough to beat anyone, but not consistent enough to be a real title threat. Some fights he lost in brutal firefights. Other times he seemed to fade physically. The criticism grew stronger. Media and part of the fan base began calling him a gatekeeper, the man who tests others, but never becomes the final step toward the belt. And in MMA, that's one of the hardest positions to be in. Respected, but not feared. Talented, but not a champion dot at that moment. It truly looked like his story would be about what could have been. Another name with all the tools, technique, flexibility, creativity, but lacking the mental resilience needed to survive. Chaos at the highest level. But this is where the moment came that separates good fighters from exceptional ones. Oliveira decided to change everything. The weight cut to featherweight was destroying him. His body was drained before he even stepped into the cage. Energy disappeared. And without energy, even the best grappler becomes vulnerable. Moving to lightweight wasn't just a change of number on the scale. It was a career reset. Suddenly, he didn't look depleted. He was stronger, more durable. His chin held up better. On the feet, he carried more confidence. And most importantly, he stopped fighting himself. Mentally, he grew. The fighter once accused of quitting began to stay. Even when hurt, even under pressure. He accepted that in the lightweight division, fights would be brutal, and that if he wanted to be champion, he had to be willing to walk through fire. And that's when the streak began, the one that changed his entire legacy. The wins started stacking up, and they weren't close decisions. They were finishes, submissions, TKOs, performance bonuses. Oliveira transformed into the most dangerous hunter in the division. His guard became a trap. Opponents were afraid to go to the ground. And if they did, they usually didn't get back up. Every choke was finished with cold precision. Every transition between positions was smooth, as if he saw things a second before everyone else. Records began to fall. Most submissions in UFC history. Most finishes. One of the longest active winning streaks in the lightweight division. And all of it from a man people had doubted just a few years earlier. The definitive confirmation came when he faced Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee was a strong, athletic wrestler, confident, considered a future title contender. For many, this was supposed to be the fight that stopped Oliveira. Instead, it ended in a dominant submission. Oliveira was calm, composed, patient, and when the opportunity came, he locked in the choke and finished the fight in a way that sent a clear message to the entire division. This man is no longer just a talent. This man is a threat, from outsider to contender, from doubt to respect. And for the first time in his career, it didn't look like a coincidence. This was the true birth of Bronx in his final form. The fight with Kevin Lee wasn't just another win in a streak. It was the moment the entire division changed its perception. At the time, Lee was seen as one of the greatest athletes at lightweight. Explosive wrestler, powerful, confident, outspoken. For many, he was the one who would stop Oliveira's run. The one who would send him back to being an unpredictable grappler who couldn't handle elite physical strength. Instead, he received a lesson. Oliveira stayed calm, patient. He accepted the pressure, worked off his back, gradually built his position. And then came the moment, a guillotine choke. Precise, tight, no panic. Kevin Lee tapped. That night wasn't just about a submission. It was about confidence. It proved Oliveira could defeat a powerful wrestler with grappling of his own. Suddenly, he wasn't just a specialist. He was a complete fighter, but the real shock was still to come. When he was matched up with Tony Ferguson, many believed it would be the end of his fairy tale. Ferguson was a legend, a former interim champion, a man who had terrorized the lightweight division for years with his pace, creativity, and endurance. What happened next? No one expected. Oliveira controlled him completely. From the first round, it was clear he was operating on a different physical and technical level. He took him down, dominated the grappling, moved to mount, took the back, and then came one of the most brutal moments of his career. An armbar that looked like it might literally snap. Ferguson's arm. Ferguson survived, but the fight was one-sided. Total domination. And at that moment, there was no longer any doubt. Charles Oliveira is a title contender, the fighter who had once been written off, had become the man no one wanted to. Face. Then came the opportunity of a lifetime. A title fight against Michael Chandler for the vacant lightweight belt. The biggest moment of his career and the greatest pressure. The first round was chaotic. Wild exchanges, heavy shots, and then came the moment that brought back old doubts. Chandler cracked him hard, and Oliveira went down. The crowd froze. Was this the same old story? Would he break under pressure? But this time was different. Oliveira survived, weathered the storm, came out for the second round with a clear plan, and within seconds, he landed a precise left hook. Chandler fell. Oliveira finished him on the ground. Knockdown gives survival, gives comeback, gives knockout. That moment was symbolic. The man once criticized for weak mentality survived the critical moment and then ended the fight himself. Charles Oliveira became the UFC lightweight champion, from the favela to the throne. But becoming champion is one thing. Proving it is another. Next came Dustin Poirier, a dangerous striker, a seasoned warrior, a man who had beaten the best. For many, he was the favorite. He had the boxing, the pressure, the big fight experience. It was a hard fight. Poirier landed. Oliveira absorbed shots. There were moments when he was under pressure, when the fight danced on the edge of chaos. And then came his world. The ground. Oliveira took the back, calm, precise. Choke locked in with absolute certainty. Poirier tapped. Submission, title, defense, confirmation. This was no fluke. Not one great night. It was the peak of a transformation years in the making. Charles "Du Bronx" Oliveira wasn't just champion. He was the most dangerous man in the lightweight division. And still, his story was far from over. If anyone still doubted his championship reign, the fight with Justin Gaethje silenced them for good. Gaethje embodies chaos, pressure, brutal low kicks, heavy hands. A man who forces you to fight in the fire. And Oliveira stepped right into that fire. The first round was insane. Gaethje rocked him hard, and Oliveira went down. The arena exploded. Again that moment. Again the fall. And again the question that had followed him for years. Will he break? But this was no longer the old Oliveira. Even shaken, he remained dangerous. Gaethje rushed forward, trying to finish him. But in doing so, he stepped into the territory where Du Bronx is most lethal. Transition, control, pressure on the neck. Within seconds, it was over. Submission. Knockdown. Gives survival, gives choke. This was Charles Oliveira in his purest form. Chaotic, vulnerable, yet deadly. A man who will fall if he has to, just to drag you down into the depths where there is no escape. Yet shortly before that fight came one of the most controversial moments of his career. At the weigh-in, he missed the limit by half a pound. The belt was stripped before he even entered the cage. Officially, he was no longer champion, even though in the eyes of many fans, he still was. For a fighter who had climbed from the favela to the top, it was a massive blow. He claimed he had made weight earlier and that it was an error. But the rules are unforgiving. In that moment, he had no belt. He entered the cage against Gaethje as a former champion and still delivered a performance that looked like a title defense. But the real battle to reclaim the throne was yet to come. Islam Makhachev, a name representing a new generation of dominance, discipline, control, Dagestani pressure. For many, the worst possible stylistic matchup. Grappler versus grappler. Technique versus technique. The fight was tense. Makhachev was calm, methodical. Oliveira searched for chaos, transitions, opportunity. There were striking exchanges, But the difference was most evident in control dot, and then came the decisive moment. Submission. Makashov took him down, secured position, and finished the choke. Oliveira was forced to tap. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't the one tightening the choke. He was the one receiving it. And with that, his championship era ended, once again without the belt. Once again off the throne. Once again in the role of challenger. For some, that would have been the end of the story. For Oliveira, it was just another fall in a career defined by rising after the hardest ones. And history had already shown it's from the toughest falls that he returns the strongest. After the loss to Islam Makhachev, a question hung in the air, one that had appeared several times throughout his career. Is this the end? Charles Oliveira had already reached the top once. He had already held the belt. And combat sports history is full of champions who, after losing their title, never found the same fire again. They never came back. But if his career has proven anything, it's that Du Bronx is most dangerous when people count him out. The next obstacle was Beneil Dariush. Quiet, technical, well-rounded. Many considered him one of the most underrated men in the division. For Oliveira, this wasn't just another fight. It was a ticket back to the absolute elite. And the answer came quickly, brutally. From the opening seconds, the tension was obvious. Striking exchanges, pressure, movement. Then came the moment. A hard punch, a perfectly timed shot. Dariush hit the canvas. Oliveira didn't hesitate. He finished him without mercy. Explosive knockout, got no drawn-out battle. No hesitation. A clean, fast finish. And a clear message to the entire lightweight division. I'm not done. Contender again. Threat again. Then came another massive challenge. Ilia to Puria, about the new generation. Undefeated, confident, aggressive. For many, the future of the division. For Oliveira, it was a chance to return to the title picture and prove he still belonged at the top. But this time, the story didn't bend in his favor. The fight was short, intense, dangerous, and then came the shot. Topuria landed clean. Oliveira went down dot first-round knockout. The arena fell silent. And so did many fans who believed in another comeback. This time, it wasn't a close fight. It wasn't a long war. It was a hard, fast ending. And right there, it felt like the circle was closing. The new generation taking control. Oliveira, who had risen so many times, perhaps finally meeting the reality of time and the evolution of the sport dot, truly felt like there might be no road back. But if anything defines his career, it's his ability to return from places where others stop. After the loss to Topuria came another test, Mateusz Gamrot. A relentless technical wrestler. Exactly the kind of opponent who can exploit even the smallest mistake. Many said that if Oliveira lost again, his era would be over for good dot, but inside the cage, a different Du Bronx appeared once more. Calm, focused, prepared, not reckless, not diving blindly into chaos. He controlled the pace, waited for his moment dot, and when it came, he took it. A dominant performance, smooth transitions to the ground, pressure, and in the end, a submission, his signature. A choke that once again reminded everyone why he holds historic records. No fall without an answer. No loss without a response. Du Bronx still lives. And maybe that ability to return is what makes Charles Oliveira more than just a former champion dot. It makes him an unfinished story. After all the falls, the wins, the stripped belt, and the comebacks, one thing remains constant. Charles Oliveira's style dot. It's a style that offers no peace. A style that ignores the safe road to a decision. Oliveira doesn't fight to win on points. He fights to make you tap or fall. He holds the record for most submissions in UFC history. But numbers alone don't capture what that means. It's not just how many people he has choked out. It's how he does it. He's willing to accept a knockdown, willing to risk position. He'll even pull guard if he senses opportunity. Most fighters are afraid to be on their backs. For him, it's hunting ground. His guard isn't defense dot, it's a trap. Once he pulls you into his world, the game begins, and he's already one step ahead. Transitions flow seamlessly. Attacks come in waves. And the moment he senses panic, it's over. But that same willingness to take risks is why his career has never been easy. Oliveira isn't perfect. He isn't untouchable. He's vulnerable. And that's what makes him so fascinating. His entire career, he has been the outsider. Even as champion, he was often underestimated. He speaks softly. He doesn't project a dominant alpha personality. He doesn't need trash talk. His motivation has never been media games, Doc. It's faith, family, the favela. He never forgot where he came from. After victories, he talks about God, about his mother, about his community. He doesn't play a role. He doesn't pretend. And maybe that's why fans connect with him. He's authentic, Dot, and now he stands before another chapter, one that could either close his legacy or reopen it once again. Max Holloway. Their first fight took place more than a decade ago, when both were young and just starting their careers. It ended due to injury, without a true answer. Two future champions who only briefly crossed paths. Now their roads meet again. The rematch. This time for the BMF title, a symbol of respect, toughness, and fighting spirit. Scheduled for Saturday, March 8th, 2026. For Holloway, it's about defending his status as one of the toughest fighters of his generation. For Oliveira, it's more than that, Dot. It's a chance to prove he still belongs among the absolute elite. That the loss to Topuria wasn't the final stop. That the story of Bronx isn't finished. A win puts him back into the title mix. A loss could signal the end of his era at the highest level. But if history has shown anything, it's this. Charles Oliveira is most dangerous when his back is against the wall. From a child who wasn't supposed to compete in sports, he became a record holder. From a fighter written off, he became champion, Dot, and from a man who fell, he has risen again and again as a challenger. The only question now is, are we about to witness the final chapter of his legend?
Leave a like, subscribe, and write in the comments the story you want to hear next. See you at the next video.